My name is Clara Whitmore, and at 28, I thought I'd finally build a life on my own terms. I worked as a registered nurse at St. Mary's Hospital in Portland, had my own cozy apartment downtown, and most importantly, I was in love with a man who made me feel seen. Elias Rivera, a tattoo artist with ink-stained hands and the kindest eyes I'd ever known. To most people, Elias was genuine, hardworking, and full of life. But to my mother, Margaret Whitmore, he was nothing more than a walking scandal. You see, my family isn't just wealthy, we're old Portland money. My grandfather built his fortune in lumber, and my mother has spent her entire life guarding that legacy like it's royal blood. She belongs to country clubs, attends charity galas, and measures human worth by pedigree. In her eyes, Elias was beneath me. A man with tattoos and a motorcycle couldn't possibly fit into her carefully curated social circle. The first time I brought him to Sunday dinner, she didn't even pretend to hide her disgust. Every question was a dagger wrapped in politeness. How stable is your art business? Do you plan to stay in that neighborhood? My father stayed buried in his newspaper, offering only an occasional grunt of agreement, while my younger brother, Nathan, who'd never held a job longer than 6 months, sat smirking like it was all entertainment. Elias, though, handled it all with grace. He complimented my mother's cooking, answered her barbed questions honestly, and even joked with Nathan about motorcycles. I could see it in her eyes, the silent judgment, the decision forming. This wasn't the son-in-law she wanted. After dinner, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Clara, darling," she began in her practiced, sugary tone. "I'm sure Elias is a nice man, but really, what kind of life can a tattoo artist give you? You should be thinking about your future, college funds, retirement, reputation." I remember the way her voice dripped with concern, like she was rescuing me from a tragic mistake. I wanted to scream that I didn't need saving. I had my own career, my own stability, and more than that, my own heart. That night, as Elias held me and whispered that he loved me exactly as I was, I realized something. My mother didn't want what was best for me, she wanted what looked best for her. And that realization was the first crack in the perfect Whitmore family portrait. 6 months later, Elias proposed on an ordinary Tuesday night in our tiny kitchen. I was still in my scrubs, hair a mess, when he turned from the stove, holding a small box and looking both nervous and certain at the same time. "Clara," he said softly, "I can't imagine my life without you in it. Will you marry me?" Inside the box wasn't some flashy, overpriced ring, but a delicate band he'd designed himself, with 2 small intertwined branches symbolizing growth and resilience. It wasn't about money. It was about meaning. I didn't hesitate. I said yes through tears, laughing as he slipped the ring onto my shaking hand. For the first time in years, I felt completely sure of something. The next morning, I called my parents, expecting at least a sliver of happiness. I should have known better. There was a long silence after I told my mother. Then came the sigh-long, disappointed, rehearsed. "Clara," she said finally, "you're throwing away your potential. Marriage is permanent, dear. Are you certain you want to spend your life worrying about rent and credit cards?" "It's not like that, Mom," I tried to explain. "Elias is opening his own tattoo studio next year. He's amazing at what he does, and I'm doing well at the hospital. We're building something together." Her tone sharpened. "Together? You think love will pay the bills? You were supposed to marry someone with a future, not someone still drawing it." I could almost hear my father's quiet approval of her words in the background, the newspaper rustling as if punctuating her disappointment. When I told my brother Nathan, he laughed. "You're marrying a tattoo artist? Wow, Mom's gonna love that. Guess I'm the successful one now." This from a man whose biggest achievement was completing an online gaming tournament. Within hours, My engagement was the family scandal. My mother called relatives, whispering her version of concern. Clara's making a mistake. He's not her kind of people. By dinner, half the extended family had texted me advice about thinking twice. Still, Elias and I went ahead with our plans. We married quietly in a botanical garden with just close friends and his warm, loving family. His mother, Sophia, cried and kissed my cheeks. His father toasted us with tears in his eyes, calling me Mia. It was small, imperfect, and more real than anything my mother's luxury galas had ever been. But peace doesn't last long when people like my mother feel their control slipping. 3 months after the wedding, she showed up unannounced at my apartment. Her heels clicked on the hardwood like punctuation marks of disapproval. "You still have time to fix this," she said sharply. "An annulment is cleaner than a divorce. I can call our attorney." I stopped her right there. "Mom, this isn't a phase. I love him. I'm happy. Can't you just be happy for me?" Her expression hardened, eyes cold as marble. "Happiness isn't the same as respectability, Clara, and I won't watch you ruin the Whitmore name." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about love or protection. It was about power. And she couldn't stand that, for once. I'd chosen something that made me happy instead of something that made her proud. A year after our small, beautiful wedding, I found out I was pregnant. I still remember the moment the test turned positive. I sat on the bathroom floor, clutching that little stick and crying so hard I could barely breathe. Not out of fear, but pure joy. Elias burst into tears when I told him, spinning me around the living room before dropping to his knees and kissing my stomach. From that moment on, our world revolved around the baby. Elias painted the nursery himself, a soft green with tiny hand-drawn vines curling along the walls. His family showered us with love. Sophia called me every morning to check if I'd eaten, while his sister, Camila, sent me lists of baby names and little crocheted booties she made by hand. My own family, however, was another story. I knew I'd have to tell my parents eventually. Even though we hadn't spoken in months, I told myself maybe this would melt my mother's icy heart. After all, wasn't becoming a grandmother supposed to change people? I imagined her face softening when I told her she'd have a grandchild, her hand reaching for mine. So, on Christmas morning, I put on a red maternity dress and drove through the Portland drizzle to my parents' house. Elias wanted to come, but I told him no. I needed to face them first. The Whitmore mansion looked exactly as it had my entire life. Elegant, distant, perfect. The wreath on the front door matched the poinsettias on the porch. The smell of pine and money hung in the air. My mother opened the door in a cream cashmere sweater and pearls. The picture of composure? "Clara," she said coolly, eyeing my belly, "you look substantial." Inside, my father sat reading the financial section, pretending I wasn't there. Nathan sprawled on the couch, gaming on his phone like a 15-year-old. No one stood to greet me. I smiled anyway, because hope is stubborn. After a few minutes of stiff small talk, I took a deep breath. "Mom, Dad, I have some news." They looked up just long enough for me to continue. "Elias and I are expecting a baby." "You're going to be grandparents." Silence. Not joy, not shock, just silence. My father's paper crinkled. Nathan's smirk widened. And my mother's face shifted. For a second, I thought I saw vulnerability, then it hardened into something vicious. "I don't want you or that bastard in this family," she said coldly. "You're dead to me and out of the will." The words hit me like ice water. I stared at her, waiting for her to take it back, to say she didn't mean it. But her expression didn't waver. She meant every syllable. My father didn't defend me. Nathan didn't say a word. I realized, standing in that perfect living room, that I was completely alone. Without saying another word. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small Christmas box I brought, wrapped carefully in gold paper and tied with a red ribbon. I placed it gently on the table. "This is for you," I said quietly. "Merry Christmas, Mother." Then I turned and walked out. I didn't cry. Not yet. I held my head high as I stepped into the rain, feeling the chill sting my cheeks. Hours later, as I sat in the hospital parking lot, my phone rang. It was Nathan, panicked. "Clara, what the hell did you put in that box?" "Mom's been screaming for 20 minutes. Dad called 911, she's losing it." Inside the box was the first ultrasound photo of my baby and a note. "This is the grandchild you'll never know. Merry Christmas from the family you rejected." I let the silence hang between us before replying. "She made her choice, Nathan. Now she can live with it." And for the first time in my life, I realized the truth. My mother hadn't disowned me that day. She just set me free. When I walked out of that mansion on Christmas morning, I didn't look back. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain, soaking through my red dress as I made my way to my car. My hand shook, but not from cold, from the finality of it all. My mother's words, "You're dead to me," echoed in my skull like a church bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I sat in the driver's seat for several minutes, watching my breath fog the window, trying to process what had just happened. My baby kicked for the first time, then soft but real. That tiny movement grounded me. I rested my palm against my stomach and whispered, "It's just us now, little one." And that's enough. 3 hours later, the phone call came. Nathan's voice crackled through the line, high and frantic. "Clara, what did you put in that gift box?" I closed my eyes. "You mean the one I left for Mom? She's screaming, Clara. Dad thought she was dying. The neighbors called the cops. She opened it, saw something, and completely lost it." I leaned back, my fingers tightening on the steering wheel. "You mean she opened the ultrasound photo?" Nathan paused, his breathing shaky. "She won't stop yelling about the baby. Keeps saying, 'My grandchild. The baby.' Over and over. What did you write in that note?" I recited it calmly, like I was reading a prayer. "This is the grandchild you'll never know. Merry Christmas from the family you rejected." Nathan exhaled sharply. "Jesus, Clara, you broke her." "No," I said evenly. "She broke herself the moment she decided that her reputation was worth more than her daughter." For once, he had no comeback. Just silence. When I hung up, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't even anger anymore. It was something colder, clarity. My entire life had been shaped by trying to please that woman, bending myself into whatever version of acceptable she demanded. But this time I had drawn a line, and she finally knew what it felt like to be on the other side of rejection. That night, Elias found me still sitting in the parking lot outside St. Mary's Hospital. He didn't ask what happened. He just climbed into the passenger seat and took my hand. I told him everything, every word, every detail. He listened quietly, his thumb tracing circles against my palm. When I finished, he whispered, "I'm sorry my being in your life caused this." Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed earlier spilled freely now. "Don't you dare apologize," I said fiercely. "You didn't break my family. You revealed what they really were." He nodded, his jaw tight, and then leaned forward to kiss my forehead. "Then we'll build our own family. One that actually deserves you." That night, we made hot chocolate, turned on soft music, and sat by the small fake Christmas tree in our apartment. The lights blinked softly, reflecting in Elias's tired eyes. He took my hands again and said, "One day, Clara, we'll tell our child this story. Not as a tragedy, but as proof that love wins over control." I wanted to believe him. Days turned into weeks. The news about my mother's meltdown spread through the Whitmore social circle like wildfire. Her friends whispered behind manicured hands about the Christmas incident. My father stayed quiet, too proud to admit that his wife's cruelty had backfired so publicly. And me? I went on with my life. I threw myself into work, preparing for motherhood, surrounding myself with people who loved me without conditions. Sophia and Camila became my constant support. They hosted a baby shower where everyone brought handmade gifts, tiny quilts, crocheted hats, painted wooden toys. Not one member of the Whitmore family was invited. I knew my mother's scream that morning wasn't just about the ultrasound, it was about power. She had lost control over the daughter she used to command like a pawn. The ultrasound was proof she couldn't erase me, couldn't rewrite my life to fit her. Perfect narrative dot, and that realization shattered her more deeply than any argument ever could. For the first time, I understood the real meaning of revenge. It wasn't screaming back or seeking payback, it was peace. Living well, thriving, refusing to shrink under someone else's cruelty. The gift I'd left behind wasn't just a symbol of rebellion, it was a mirror. A reflection of everything she'd lost the moment she chose pride over love. And though I didn't know it yet, that single act would be the spark that set the entire Whitmore family's carefully curated world on fire. The morning after Christmas, Portland's sky hung gray and heavy, as if the weather itself shared my exhaustion. I woke up to a dozen missed calls, half from unknown numbers, half from my father. I didn't answer any of them. The message was clear enough. The Whitmore's perfect holiday had imploded by noon. My phone buzzed again. Nathan. This time I picked up. Clara, it's chaos here, he blurted. Mom hasn't slept. She's pacing, muttering about betrayal, about how you humiliated her. Dad's furious, not at you, but at her. He says she went too far. The neighbors are gossiping. Someone posted about it on the country club social board. I nearly laughed, a hollow sound that startled even me. So she's not worried about losing a daughter. She's worried about losing her reputation. Clara, she's unraveling. You don't understand. She's been throwing out all your photos, tearing up old family albums. Good, I cut him off. Now they'll match how she's treated me for years. He went quiet, then said softly, I don't think she's ever going to recover from this. Then maybe she'll finally feel what it's like to lose someone she thought she owned. I ended the call before he could respond. Later that day, Elias came home early from the studio. He had heard through mutual acquaintances, clients who knew my family's name, that the Whitmore's Christmas meltdown had become small-town legend overnight. Someone had even seen police cars at my parents' house. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of tea growing cold in my hands when he placed his palms over mine. You don't have to feel guilty, Clara, he said quietly. You didn't cause this. You revealed it. But I did feel something, not guilt exactly, but grief. A deep, aching sadness that my family had reached this point. That a mother could look at her daughter, at her grandchild, and feel nothing but disgust. That night, the power flickered during a storm, and I found myself staring out the window at the rain. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped by my family's expectations. I felt free, terrified but free. 3 days later, my father showed up at the hospital while I was finishing a late shift. He looked tired, older, the sharp lines of authority softened by something like regret. Clara, he said, stepping into the quiet hallway. Your mother's not well. She's refusing to eat, crying all the time. Maybe if you called her. I took a slow breath. Dad, she disowned me. You both stood there while she did it. I won't pretend that didn't happen because she's uncomfortable now. He rubbed his temples. She didn't mean it. Yes, she did, I said. And maybe it's time you stop pretending she didn't. He didn't argue. Just sighed, nodded slightly, and walked away. The sound of his polished shoes echoing down the sterile corridor. That was the last time I saw him for months. In the following weeks, I blocked every unknown number, changed my address, and built a new rhythm with Elias. The story of the Whitmore Christmas scandal faded from the gossip pages, but for me, the fallout lingered quietly, not as chaos, but as space. The kind of space you need to start rebuilding your life after the wreckage of someone else's control. And in that silence, I made a quiet vow. My child would never grow up thinking love came with conditions. The weeks after, Christmas passed in a blur of silence and new beginnings. I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come, stopped checking my phone for my father's name, and started focusing on what truly mattered: my growing child, my husband, and the peace that had always been waiting for me once I stepped out from under my mother's shadow. Elias was everything my family never valued: patient, humble, and endlessly kind. He never once told me to get over it or move on. Instead, he stood beside me through the waves of emotion that hit without warning. Some mornings I woke up angry. Other days I'd find myself crying over things as simple as a song on the radio or the smell of pine that reminded me of Christmas morning. Through it all, Elias listened. No judgment, no fixing, just presence. His family, the Riveras, wrapped me in a love that felt foreign at first, too open, too genuine, too uncomplicated. But slowly, I let it in. Sophia, his mother, started visiting twice a week, always bringing homemade food because, as she said, no one heals on an empty stomach. Her kitchen wisdom came with warmth that melted every wall I'd built. Family isn't who shares your blood, Mia, she told me one evening as she stirred pozole on her stove. It's who stays when the storm hits. Elias's father, Carlos, was a quiet man who spoke more with his actions. One weekend, he showed up at our apartment with a pile of lumber and a smile. "We're building your baby's crib," he said simply. The three of us spent hours sanding, measuring, and laughing. When it was done, Carlos ran his hand over the smooth surface and said, "Safe, strong, and steady, just like she be." I cried that night, not from sadness but gratitude. Then there was Camila, Elias's sister, who took her role as auntie extraordinaire very seriously. She dragged me shopping for maternity clothes, insisting I deserved to look radiant even when I felt like a walking watermelon. "You're glowing," she teased. "And if your mother can't see it, that's her blindness, not your flaw." She even organized a small baby shower in their backyard, complete with fairy lights, pastel decorations, and a homemade cake that said, "Welcome, little Rivera." As the months went by, my belly grew, and so did my sense of belonging. For the first time, I experienced what family was supposed to feel like: laughter without judgment, advice without strings, love without conditions. Still, the ghost of my old life lingered. Occasionally, I'd get messages from acquaintances. "Your mother's been asking about you. She's been crying at the club. She misses you terribly." Each one felt like bait, a hug dipped in guilt. But I didn't bite. I'd spent too long confusing control for love. I wasn't going back at 20 weeks. Elias and I found out we were having a girl. The ultrasound tech smiled and said, "She's healthy, strong, and already kicking like a soccer player." Elias laughed through tears. He kissed my hand and whispered, "Our little warrior." That night we lay in bed, his hand resting on my belly. "She'll never have to wonder if she's enough," he said softly. "Not once. Not for a second." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. "She knows she's loved no matter what." By the time I hit my third trimester, our apartment had transformed into a sanctuary. The crib Carlos built stood proudly in the corner, surrounded by gifts from the Rivera family, soft blankets, storybooks in Spanish and English, and a little dream catcher Camila hung over the crib to guard her heart. Sophia hosted weekly dinners, calling them practice nights for when the baby arrived. Everyone gathered around the table, cousins, neighbors, friends, passing food and laughter like currency. No one cared about lineage or legacy or the right last name. They just cared that I was part of them. One night during dessert, Sophia placed her hand over mine. "You know," she said, her eyes kind, "you don't have to be born into a family for it to be yours. You just have to choose it." And I did. When our daughter was born, I named her Lashana Grace. Lashana for the light she brought into my life. Grace for the forgiveness I finally gave myself the day I held her for the first time, with Elias crying beside me and Sophia whispering prayers in Spanish. I realized something powerful. My mother's rejection hadn't destroyed me. It had delivered me into the arms of something better. Love that didn't demand, didn't judge, didn't measure worth in dollars or pedigree. Love that stayed. And as Luciana's tiny fingers curled around mine, I knew the truth Sophia had tried to tell me all along. Sometimes the family you choose is the one that finally sets you free. By the time Lusana was 6 months old, our lives had settled into a rhythm that felt both peaceful and purposeful. Gone were the chaos and emotional bruises of my mother's world, replaced by small, steady victories that built a foundation stronger than any inheritance ever could. Elias's tattoo studio, Iron and Ink, had blossomed into something remarkable. What started as a single rented space with a few loyal clients grew into a thriving business that became a quiet Portland sensation. Word spread quickly, not just because of Elias's artistry, but because of his approach. He listened. He sketched every design from scratch, treating each client's story like something sacred. His waitlist stretched 3 months out, and local magazines began calling him Portland's sole artist. He still came home every night, smelling faintly of ink and lavender soap, tired but fulfilled, with that same spark in his eyes that had drawn me to him years ago. I'd watch him hold Lashana after dinner, her tiny fingers tugging at his beard, and I'd think, this is what real success looks like. As for me, motherhood didn't slow my career. If anything, it made me sharper, more focused. I'd return to ST, Mary's hospital after maternity leave, stepping back into the chaos of the AAA with renewed strength. Sleepless nights with a newborn had taught me more about patience and crisis management than any leadership seminar ever could. Within a few months, I was promoted to charge nurse, responsible for managing entire shifts and coordinating critical cases. The title came with longer hours, but also a pay raise significant enough to change everything. For the first time, Elias and I began to dream bigger. We sat down one evening, a pot of coffee between us and Lusana asleep in her bassinet, and mapped out our future. We could buy a house, Elias said, half in awe, half in disbelief. A real home, backyard, sunlight, the whole thing. I smiled, tapping the calculator on my phone. Between your studio's income and my new salary, it's not just possible. It's practical. We started looking the next week. Every Sunday, we'd drive around the neighborhoods we loved, Lashana babbling in the back seat. Most places were too expensive, too old, or too small, until one afternoon, we found it, a pale blue craftsman home with wide windows, a small garden out front, and a maple tree that turned gold in autumn. It wasn't grand like my parents' mansion, but it had something that house never did. Warmth. We bought it with money we'd earned ourselves, no family help. No trust funds, no signatures from disapproving parents. Just hard work, persistence, and love. Moving day was a blur of cardboard boxes, laughter, and Camila chasing Luciana around the empty living room. Sophia blessed each room with rosemary and whispered prayers, while Carlos carried the crib he'd built into the nursery. When we finally collapsed on the couch that night, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I told Elias I've never felt richer in my life. He grinned and kissed my forehead. Because this isn't wealth, Clara, it's freedom. He was right. Owning that home marked the first time I truly felt in control of my life. Every mortgage payment, every late night shift, every ink stain on Elias's hands, it all meant something. It was proof that we'd built a life from ashes and chosen love over fear. Of course, whispers from the Whitmore world still reached me occasionally. My father's name popped up once in a business journal, hinting at domestic difficulties. Rumor had it my parents' marriage was unraveling under the weight of their pride and secrets. But by then, those headlines didn't sting anymore, while their empire cracked under appearances. Mine was growing, quiet, honest, and uncheckable. I realized then that revenge doesn't always come through confrontation or scandal. Sometimes, the truest revenge is peace, living so well that your happiness becomes undeniable proof of how wrong they were about you. And as Lashana giggled in her high chair and Elias worked on a sketch by the kitchen window, I knew we were already living that proof every single day. Peace has a way of drawing out the people who once thrived on your chaos. Just when Elias and I began to believe the past was behind us, my mother found a way to reach through the quiet, her need for control refusing to die. Even when our relationship had doubt, it started steadily, like a chill slipping under a closed door. An anonymous envelope arrived in our new mailbox, no return address. But the handwriting was unmistakable, precise, elegant. My mother's. Inside was a single note written on embossed stationery. Clara, it's time you stop this rebellion. You've made your point. Come home before your poor father's heart gives out. You're still my daughter, whether you like it or not. No apology. No acknowledgement of the cruelty she'd inflicted. Just that familiar tone of command, as if I were still a child to be summoned at her convenience. I tore the letter in half and tossed it in the trash, but it didn't end there. A week later, my best friend from the hospital, Emily, mentioned she'd received a phone call from someone claiming to be concerned about your well-being. When Emily said the caller sounded like an upper crust headmistress, I didn't need to ask who it was. Then came the call from my supervisor. Dr. Wells, your mother reached out to the administration, she said, clearly uncomfortable. She implied you might be experiencing postpartum instability and suggested we evaluate your fitness to work full-time. My jaw clenched. So she's trying to ruin my career now? Dr. Wells shook her head. She didn't succeed. I told her interference was inappropriate. But Clara, maybe consider legal protection if this continues. I went home that night furious, trembling, and exhausted. Elias listened silently as I recounted everything. When I finished, he exhaled and said, "She doesn't want reconciliation, Clara. She wants control." The moment she lost it, she started clawing to get it back. He was right. I sent one message, a short, formal email that would later become evidence. Do not contact me, my employer, or anyone associated with my family again. Any further harassment will result in legal action. This is your only warning. 2 days later, I received her reply. I'll always do what's necessary to protect you from your mistakes. A mother doesn't need permission to save her child. That sentence chilled me more than any threat could have. Elias's sister, Camila, insisted we install a home security system. Sophia began lighting a candle every evening, whispering, "Let her find peace, Mia, so she'll leave yours alone." Weeks passed. My mother stopped calling employers and friends, but her obsession didn't end. It just went underground. I heard from Nathan that she'd started hiring private investigators just to keep tabs. It was the final confirmation I needed. I contacted an attorney and filed for a restraining order. It was the hardest line I'd ever drawn, but also the cleanest. When the court approved it, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, total. Uncheckable safety. For the first time, my mother's reach ended where my peace began. The months that followed were both fragile and luminous. My mother's interference had finally stopped after the restraining order was granted, and for the first time since my childhood, my world was quiet. There were no phone calls laced with disappointment, no letters disguised as orders, no guilt to swallow. Just the rhythmic comfort of Elias's laughter, the hum of the crib Carlos built, and the steady pulse of a new life growing inside me. Lashana arrived on a golden morning in early spring, 3 days before her due date. The labor was long, painful, and humbling, but the moment she was placed on my chest, everything stilled. She was tiny, perfect, and loud, screaming her arrival into the world with a voice that felt like freedom itself. Elias wept openly, his forehead pressed against mine. "You did it, Clara," he whispered. "She's here. She's ours." I cried too, not just from the joy of holding our daughter, but from the quiet realization that I had crossed into a new life, one my mother could never control or taint. The hospital room filled slowly with people who chose to be there. Sophia arrived with a bouquet of white lilies and whispered blessings in Spanish over Lashana's head. Camila brought coffee, warm blankets, and laughter. Even my co-workers from St. Mary's stopped by to celebrate. The absence of my parents wasn't a wound anymore. It was peace. In the weeks that followed, I spent long, quiet nights nursing Lashana, her tiny hand gripping my finger while the world slept. I'd look down at her face, Elias's eyes, my stubborn chin, and feel something profound settle inside me. This little girl would never have to earn love the way I had. She'd never mistake fear for respect, obedience for affection. She'd grow up knowing that she was wanted, that her worth was not conditional. Motherhood reshaped me. It didn't make me softer, it made me stronger. It stripped away the last traces of guilt and shame my mother had planted in me and replaced them with something fierce and tender purpose. One night, as Lashana slept soundly between us, Elias murmured, "You broke the cycle, Clara." And as I lay there in the soft glow of our nursery light, listening to the gentle rhythm of our daughter's breathing, I finally believed him. Aina was 8 months old when the past came knocking again, not in the form of my mother this time, but my brother Nathan. It was a rainy Saturday morning, and I was on my day off, still in my robe, watching Lashana crawl across the living room rug when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a familiar figure standing awkwardly on the porch. Nathan looked broken. His once slicked hair was unkempt, his clothes wrinkled, and the confidence that used to border on arrogance had vanished. For a moment, I just stared, torn between instinct and curiosity. Then I opened the door. "What do you want, Nathan?" I asked, my voice colder than I intended. He swallowed hard, eyes darting to Luciana behind me. His voice cracked. "I needed to see you, to tell you what's been happening." Against my better judgment, I let him in. He stood in the doorway, staring at Luciana as if seeing her knocked the air from his lungs. "She looks just like you did when you were a baby," he whispered. "She's beautiful." I crossed my arms. "Say what you came to say." He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "Mom and Dad, they're getting divorced." The words hit harder than I expected. My parents had built their entire identity on appearances, the perfect couple with the perfect house and the perfect family. Divorce didn't exist in Patricia Whitmore's world. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "It started after Christmas," he said. "Dad couldn't handle what she did to you. They've been fighting nonstop ever since." Then he found out. Nathan hesitated. He found out Mom was giving me money. For years. She told him it was for household expenses or charity. But she was. She was paying all my bills. Rent, credit cards, car payments, everything. I felt a surge of anger. "How much?" He looked down. 43,000. Maybe more. My breath caught. My mother had cut me off, called my child a mistake, and thrown me out of the will. all while secretly funding her golden son's entire lifestyle. She lied to him. Nathan continued. When he confronted her, everything blew up. He moved out last month. She's alone now. She's not herself. I wanted to feel pity, but I couldn't. Actions have consequences, I said simply. Nathan's eyes were glassy. I know. That's why I'm here. I've been living off her money and pretending I was better than you. You were right about everything. I just didn't want to see it. He glanced again at Lashana, who was giggling on the floor, banging her toy blocks together. I want to change, Clara. I got a job at an auto shop. I'm moving into my own place next week. I want to earn my life for once. And if you'll let me, I'd like to be her uncle, the kind she deserves. For a long moment, I said nothing. The old me would have sobbed instantly, but the woman standing before him now had learned that love without boundaries is just permission for more pain. You can be part of her life, I said finally, but only if you prove you've changed. No lies, no manipulation, and no contact with Mom. If you betray that trust even once, you're gone. He nodded quickly. Understood. When he left, I closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling. Maybe people can change, I thought, but only when they lose everything they used to hide behind Dot, and for the first time in years, I felt something unexpected toward my brother. Hope Nathan kept his word. In the months that followed, he stayed consistent, showing up not with apologies, but with quiet actions. He got that job at the auto shop, paid his own bills, and came by occasionally to help Elias fix small things around the house. Luciana adored him. She'd squeal with laughter every time he made silly faces. And I saw glimpses of the brother I'd always wished for, but our peace was fragile. And it didn't take long for the past to rattle the door again. One morning, an official letter arrived, not from my family, but from my lawyer. My mother had violated the restraining order. She'd hired a private investigator to photograph Luciana and me during one of our park walks. The photos had been emailed to my father, along with a message that read, "Look how she's ruining that child already." My stomach turned cold. I thought she was finally fading from our lives, but her obsession had just gone underground. That evening, I called my attorney, who immediately filed a motion for contempt of court. The judge moved swiftly. Patricia Whitmore was fined and given a stern warning. Any further contact, direct or indirect, would result in criminal charges. The silence that followed was absolute. For the first time, her power was stripped away by something she couldn't charm, threaten, or by the law. A few weeks later, Nathan told me quietly, Dad moved out permanently. The house is being sold to pay for the divorce settlement. Mom's not the same. She's angry, but mostly at herself. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. When the restraining order was officially renewed for another year, I felt a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't about revenge, it was about protection. About teaching myself and my daughter that peace is worth defending, even from blood. That night, as I tucked Luciana into her crib, I whispered, "You'll never have to fear the people who claim to love you." The war my mother started had finally ended, not with shouting or spectacle, but with quiet justice and a locked door. She could no longer open Dot by the time Luciana turned 1. The scars of the past had begun to fade, not erased, but soft by something sturdier than forgiveness, peace. The restraining order had given me breathing room. Nathan had become a steady part of our lives, and my mother's silence had stretched long enough to finally feel permanent. We decided to celebrate Luciana's first birthday with a gathering that reflected the life we'd built, simple, warm, and surrounded by the people who'd shown up when blood turned its back. The Rivera backyard was strung with fairy lights, tables covered in sunflowers and pastel cloths. Sophia had spent 2 days baking, insisting, "Every cake tastes better when it's made with love." Mia, while Camila orchestrated the decorations like a general leading a joyful army, Elias carried Lejana out into the yard, her tiny head crowned with a paper tiara that said one. She giggled as everyone clapped, reaching her chubby hands toward the candles. Nathan stood off to the side, holding a camera, smiling, not the smug grin I grew up resenting, but a quiet, grateful smile that told me he understood what this moment meant. When it came time to make a toast, Elias cleared his throat. "A year ago," he began, "we didn't know what kind of world we were bringing our daughter into. But what we learned is that family isn't built from history, it's built from heart. And no matter what's behind us, what's here tonight, this is home." There were tears, laughter, clinking glasses. I looked around and saw faces that had become my anchor. Sophia, who'd held me through every storm. Camila, who taught me that sisterhood could be chosen. Nathan, whose redemption had been quiet but real. And Elias, my partner, my safe place. When the party ended and the yard lights dimmed, I sat on the porch swing with Elias, watching Lashana sleep in her stroller. The air smelled of vanilla cake in late summer. "Do you ever think about them?" he asked softly. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but not with anger anymore. Just distance, like a story that ended years ago." He nodded. "You've come a long way, Clara." I smiled faintly. "We both have." In the months that followed, life unfolded with a rhythm that finally felt like living. I returned to work full-time, balancing motherhood with my new position as head nurse. Elias expanded his studio, hiring 2 apprentices and opening a second location. We bought a small lake cabin 2 hours outside Portland, our escape from everything that once defined us. Nathan kept showing up. He didn't try to play the savior or the victim, he just stayed. He'd come by on weekends, fixing things, cooking dinner, letting Lashana crawl all over him while he built towers of blocks she'd immediately knock down. Watching him made me believe that cycles could be broken, not perfectly, but permanently enough. One quiet evening, about a year after the restraining order, I received a letter through my attorney. It was from my father. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't defend my mother. He simply wrote, "I've seen the pictures Nathan sends. Lashana looks healthy and happy. You did what I couldn't. You stood up to her. I'm proud of you." For the first time, I didn't cry. I just felt calm. Maybe that was enough closure for both of us. That night, I sat on the floor beside Lashana's crib, tracing her tiny fingers as she slept. Elias leaned against the doorframe, smiling softly. "She's got your strength," he whispered. "Maybe," I said, brushing her hair back gently. "But I hope she never has to use it the way I did." He crossed the room and knelt beside me. "She won't, because she has us." And in that moment, surrounded by quiet love and the heartbeat of a home built from nothing but truth, I realized something simple and profound. I hadn't lost a family. I created one, not one built on control or bloodline, but on choice, respect, and love that stayed even when it wasn't easy. That was my real inheritance. And it was worth everything I'd given up to earn it. Looking back on everything, the rejection, the struggle, the rebuilding, I've realized that my story was never about revenge or even justice. It was about awakening, about understanding what love truly means when you strip away the conditions, expectations, and manipulation that so often hide beneath the word family. The first theme that defined this journey was freedom through boundaries. For years, I mistook obedience for love, thinking that being a good daughter meant sacrificing pieces of myself to keep the peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all, it's captivity. The moment I chose to walk out that door on Christmas morning, I stopped being the woman my mother molded and became the woman I was meant to be. Setting boundaries wasn't cruelty. It was self-respect in its purest form. The second theme was the power of chosen family. Blood doesn't make someone family, effort does. Compassion does. Love that doesn't demand submission does. The Riveras taught me that. They loved without calculation, supported without entitlement, and showed up even when it wasn't convenient. In their home, I found the warmth that had been missing my whole life. And through them, I learned that belonging isn't something you inherit. It's something you build. Another truth was healing through accountability. My brother Nathan's journey mirrored my own in reverse. He had to lose everything before he could find himself. His redemption taught me that change is possible, but it requires honesty, humility, and time. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the weight of resentment so it no longer defines you. And finally, there was the quiet triumph of peace over pride. My mother's downfall came not through vengeance, but through her own refusal to change. She valued control more than connection, image more than intimacy. Her silence became her punishment. Mine became my healing. In the end, the story wasn't about punishment. It was about liberation. The liberation of a woman who stopped begging to be loved correctly and started surrounding herself with people who already did. Now, when I look at Luciana, her bright eyes, her fearless laughter, I see the future rewritten. She will grow up knowing that love should never hurt, that family should never require self-erasure, and that her worth isn't determined by anyone's approval. If there's one message I want every listener to take from this story, it's this: you are allowed to walk away from the people who made you, even if they call it betrayal. You are allowed to choose peace over loyalty, healing over heritage, and truth over tradition. Because sometimes the greatest act of love you can give to yourself and to the next generation is to stop the cycle that broke you. And in doing so, you don't lose your family, you create it.